Mr. Andrew Keen. Hello.
Thank you very much. It's very nice to be here on lots of levels. The first is that I'm honored that Kaldor will be publishing my book, Digital Vertigo. Hopefully that will be out next year in Turkish. That's a real honor and a thrill for me to reach a broader audience. My first book, Cult of the Amateur, did get acquired by a Turkish publisher, and then I don't quite know what happened, but in the end it didn't get published in Turkish. So this is an excellent opportunity for me to reach a broader audience, and an audience that is obviously on the cutting edge of digital technology. As a matter of interest, how many of you here are not on any social network? Anyone? Nobody? Well, that shows how connected you guys are, and that also shows why this is an important subject, an important talk. I'm also intrigued that I'm speaking at something called the Quality Conference, because my speech is about, or my concerns, my book, are about quality, but very big issue of quality, the quality of life in the 21st century, the quality of life in a hyper-connected age, the quality of life where by 2020, 50 billion intelligent devices will exist. God knows how many there'll be by 2025 or 2030. The quality of life in a world where by 2017, according to the Swedish company Ericsson, I think it's 15 times more data will travel on the network than today. 15 times, imagine that, given how much data already travels on the network. And again, I haven't asked my friends at Ericsson how much data will be traveling on the network by 2025. So the subject that interests me most of all is the quality of life in this digital age. Now, some of you may have seen a movie called The Social Network. I'm going to show a clip of it later. But it was written by the Hollywood screenwriter Aaron Sorkin. And at one point in the movie, one of the heroes, how many of you have seen the film, as a matter of interest, Social Network? A few of you. It's a very good film. It's about the origins of Facebook. It's filmed in Boston on the campus of Harvard University, where Mark Zuckerberg, the founder of Facebook, was a student. And Zuckerberg's great achievement to take his company from a startup on a university campus to Silicon Valley was enabled by a guy called Sean Parker, who's one of the most influential people in Silicon Valley. And in this movie, at one point, Sean Parker says, he's in the middle of a party, he's taking drugs, he's dancing, he's having fun, but like everybody in Silicon Valley, he's always selling, sell, always selling his vision of the future. He says, first we lived in villages, then we lived in cities, and now we're going to live on the internet. I'll come back to that phrase a number of times in today's talk, but bear that in mind. First we lived in villages. You guys in Turkey know about pre-urban society. Certainly most of you, I am assuming, live in Istanbul. So you understand the nature of urban life. But urban life, industrial urban life of the 20th century is rapidly being transformed. The great transformation, the great revolution of the 21st century is the shift from industrial, analog, city life to digital network life. You're all in business, you're all in, some of you, I'm sure, in technology, some of you are in startups. You're all on the network, so you understand this. But this has far-reaching implications. It means a lot, above all else, to the quality of our lives, the quality of our lives, how we live in the 21st century, how happy we are. how much meaning we derive from relationships, how we deal with other people, above all else, how we define ourselves. So before I start, let me give you a little, one of the organizers of the event said I should be a little interactive with you guys, so I'm going to be a bit cheeky and ask you to do something which perhaps other speakers haven't asked you to do. Why don't you look at your neighbor? Go on, some of you may know the person sitting next to you, but why don't you stare at your neighbor briefly? Go on, do it. I don't see all of you doing it. You all have to do it. Go on. Stare at your neighbor. Just look at that person. Now, most of you, when you look at that person, will be seeing a stranger. You'll see a face. It may be a face that you half recognize. You'll know, of course, whether that face is male or female. You will know how old that person is. You may have an idea of their ethnicity, but you won't know much else about them. When you stare at the person next to you, you won't know, for example, what movies they watch. You won't know what music they watch. You won't know where they had dinner last night. You won't know anything about their family or their education. You won't know about their soul. Maybe they have a soul, maybe they don't. You won't know which soccer team they support. You won't know their political views or their lack of political views. Now, in my view, the quality of life, the meaning of life, the essence of life, historically, has always been in getting to know that stranger. One of the miracles of being alive is building relationships, is learning about other people. Now, of course, very often those relationships are between male and female. They can be love affairs, but it's not just between men and women. It's between women and women, men and men, parents and children. It's all about getting to know that other person. And that's one of the great miracles, I think, of the industrial city age, is we've all been able to maintain our anonymity. When we sit next to somebody at a conference, when we sit beside someone at a restaurant, on a train, on an aeroplane, we don't know that person, and we're able to maintain our secrecy, our privacy. We maintain a shell around us. We can cut ourselves off. Now, some people like to reveal themselves. Some people are more extrovert than others. But that is, in my view, the great challenge of this age. Because in the future, not too distant future, in fact, the future, one famous science fiction writer, already exists. It's just unevenly distributed. And of course, the future always exists in Silicon Valley. That's where I'm from. In this future, you'll know your neighbor, even if that neighbor is a stranger. You'll know your neighbor because you'll be on the same network. You'll know about them. You'll know what movies they watch. You know where they're from, where they're educated. We're entering an age of what I call in my book, Digital Vertigo, hyper-visibility, an age of radical transparency. When we live on the network, when we live on the internet, as we're all connected, our privacy is replaced by a ubiquitous publicness. We will wear ourselves, and even Google, the quintessential company of the future, Google has invented a device for this. Google has invented a product called Google Glasses. So I'm staring at you now, and you stare at each other. We're all looking at each other in analog form. We're using our eyes, something that's been very useful to human beings as a species. Google is adding an extension to it. When you put Google Glasses on, you won't just see that smiling face or that grimacing face or that mysterious face next to you. You will see everything about them. You will see that person as data. So in this future world, we all become information. We all become data. We all become nodes on the network. Some of you may be shivering and thinking to yourself, oh my God, what a nightmare. Some of you may be thinking to yourself, I don't want to be exposed. I don't want to be radically transparent. Well, that's the subject of my talk today. Do we have to be so radically transparent in this new age? And how do we guarantee that we maintain our integrity, our meaning, our happiness as human beings in this digital age? Because there's one thing I can tell you for sure, there's no going back. You guys know there's no going back to the village. That's the history of Turkey. And there's no going back now to the analog industrial age of the 20th century. That, to excuse the pun, is history. We have to move forward into this digital age. For better or worse, it's inevitable. And we're the ones who are going to shape this world. Now, my book, Digital Vertigo, is built around a movie which just got voted the greatest movie of all time. It's a movie called Vertigo. Some of you, I hope, will have seen it. And it's made by Alfred Hitchcock. The reason I choose this film is threefold to build my book around. Firstly, it's a masterpiece. And if there's one thing you get out of listening to me today, of course, I hope you eventually get to read my book in Turkish. But if there's one thing you get out of this speech today, and if you haven't seen Vertigo, go and see it. You have an obligation. You don't have many obligations as human beings, but the one obligation you do have is to watch Vertigo. So go and buy the DVD. Don't steal it. Pay for it. Second reason, though, I borrow my book, the metaphor, the meaning, the narrative of the book is borrowed from Hitchcock's Vertigo, is because I fear we are all becoming participants in a Hitchcock-like noir. Hitchcock, of course, made movies in the 20th century which were nightmares, movies about ordinary people who, for some reason or other, were swept into situations they didn't understand, who were taken advantage of, exploited by evil people, by murder, by mystery. In the 20th century, of course, when you had a dominant entertainment industry, we all went to the movies, we all sat in dark theaters like this, we watched the movies, nightmares about put together by Hitchcock, noirs, and then we went home to our ordinary lives, back to our ordinary lives. The lights came on. But today, things have changed. People talk about the democratization of culture, the democratization of movies. Perhaps that's true. But what has been democratized most of all is the Hitchcock narrative, the noir. We're all being swept into a Hitchcock story. And we are all that innocent individual. In Vertigo, it's Jimmy Stewart, that innocent individual swept into a world which we don't understand, a nightmarish world. Speaking of darkness and light, it's a world that's not dark, it's a world that's well lit, too well lit. A world of Google glasses, a world of always-on networks, a world where privacy is history. So I want to begin with a clip from the movie. The story is about a private detective who's acted by Jimmy Stewart, and he's been asked to follow a very beautiful woman, the wife of an ex-college friend of his. And the scene I'm going to show you is the first moment that Jimmy Stewart sets eyes on this woman. The woman is acted by Kim Novak, and in the movie, her name is Madeleine Elster. I always make the Freudian error and say Madeleine Albright, but it's Madeleine Elster. How many of you, by the way, have seen the movie? No one? A few. Okay, well, you should see it. Well, if I give it away, if I give the narrative away, I'm doing it for your own interest. So don't blame me. So here we go. Here's the first clip. This takes place in a beautiful old restaurant in San Francisco, Ernie's, a steakhouse that no longer exists. can all guess the woman. She has a beautiful bag. Jimmy Stewart, remember, is a private detective, so his job is to look, to watch. He's almost smitten. Who wouldn't fall in love with a woman like that? Anyone? Here she comes, look. She's coming through the doorway, this great image. Now here we have, of course, she's in the movie, she's represented as a wealthy, beautiful San Francisco heiress. But those of you who have ever been to America know you should always beware of blondes, especially when they claim to be very rich. And the truth about this woman in the movie is that she's actually an imposter. She isn't really who she says she is. And the movie itself is a story of deceit and a deception. It's a movie about how the private detective, the guy who is in the business of watching, the guy who sells surveillance, falls in love with a woman who doesn't really exist, falls in love with an illusion. In a way, it's a Hitchcock warning about how we should never fall in love with something that's too good to be true. And that's why I use Hitchcock's Vertigo for my book, Digital Vertigo. Because I fear we're falling also in love with something that's too good to be true. We're being presented with the network as a kind of beautiful blonde. As more and more of us come onto the network, as more and more of us embrace social networks, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and the thousands of other networks, we're being told that connectivity brings us together as a species. We're being told that the I finally will be replaced by the we. Connectivity enables the social. We're being told then by lots of writers, lots of commentators, lots of entrepreneurs, that the social is the thing that's being enabled by the internet. I called my first book Cult of the Amateur, which was a critique of much of the amateur content on the internet. I might have called my new book, which of course is called Digital Vertigo, I might have called it The Cult of the Social, because we have a similar cult going on. The idea that the social now enables us, the idea that the social brings us together. That as more and more of us come on the internet, there are 2 billion people today. In 10, 15 years, there'll be 7 or 8 billion. By the middle of the 21st century, everyone on the planet will be on this network. Many people say this is a great thing. Many people are excited by it. Many people believe that finally the human race, in terms of the quality of our life, that had always been separated by geography, had never been able to network together, finally we've been united. That is, in Hitchcock's terms, the blonde, in my view. It's not really true. We're being sold a bill of goods. We're being sold something that's an illusion, a deception, something that will destroy us rather than make us happy, something that will make the quality of life in the digital 21st century worse rather than better. The people who write these books say the quality of 21st century life will be improved by the network. That quality means we can come together, we'll have open leadership, radical transparency. Networks will generate more value, more wealth, more meaning, more happiness. But actually, the truth is the reverse. Rather than watching a Hollywood movie, we're actually watching a movie made by Alfred Hitchcock. So let me just show you that very short clip from The Social Network, just to reiterate. First we lived in villages, then we lived in cities, and now we're going to live on the internet. So here we have the clip from The Social Network in which Justin Timberlake is playing Sean Parker.
How they check their friends' status updates.
Wait, that's weird. Why did the music
Check
stop?
to see which one of their friends changed their profiles, changed their photos, and mostly...
Seriously, what happened to the music?
We lived on farms, and then we lived in cities, and now we're going to live on the internet.
Now we're going to live on the internet. What's that going to mean? What's it going to look like? In The Social Network, Sean Parker was played by Justin Timberlake. But here's the real Sean Parker. He's actually better looking than Justin Timberlake, and richer as well. He's a multi-billionaire because he took a lot of the original stock in Facebook and is now worth several $billion. He's a movie star. I caught him, this is a photograph I took of him in in Arizona, and when he walks around, he's followed by a retinue of people. So he's a remarkable individual. As so often in Silicon Valley, it's attracted the best, the brightest, the smartest, but also the most misguided and perhaps the most exploitative. Now, the real Sean Parker is a pioneer of the social web. He founded Napster, he was the original president of Facebook, and now he's doing another startup. It's called Airtime. He's doing it with his original partner at Napster, Sean Fanning. If you remember Napster, Napster was the file-sharing music network that essentially destroyed the recorded music industry because it enabled everyone to swap music without having to pay for it. It enabled everyone to essentially become a pirate on the internet without being caught. But now, Sean Parker, God bless him, is in the business of doing something even more dramatic. Rather than wrecking the music business, he's in the business of wrecking us as human beings. He's in the business of wrecking our species. When he was asked by the New York Times what he was doing at Airtime, it's a video sharing network, he said, I want to eliminate loneliness. Eliminate loneliness. Imagine that. Eliminate loneliness. Remember at the beginning of this talk, I asked you to look at each other. We were all solitary individuals then. We didn't know about each other. What Sean Parker is trying to do at Airtime is make sure that we are no longer on our own, that we are no longer solitary, that we can share everything with each other on this online network. It's not just Sean Parker, though. If it was, it wouldn't be a problem. What's happening in Silicon Valley, billions and billions of dollars are being poured into thousands of companies, apps, platforms, products that are all in the business of eliminating loneliness. Now, we all know, of course, about Facebook. Some of you are on Facebook. We all know about Twitter. Many of you, because you're professionals, will know about LinkedIn. But if it was just those three, in Airtime, it wouldn't be a problem. But everything that's coming out of Silicon Valley, everything that is driving the internet, that is defining the internet economy, is social. Everything is in the business of eliminating loneliness. These are just some of the companies, some of the apps, some of the products. Television is going social. As television merges with the internet, so there are more and more products and companies which we will watch television online, or watching television and being on the internet will become indistinguishable, and everyone will know what we're watching because we will share it with our network. There are new music networks like Spotify and Rhapsody, which enable us to tell the world what we're listening to. There are apps which are called social reading apps, which enable us to tell the world what we're reading. There are apps for restaurants, social eating, where we tell the world where we're eating, when we're eating. There are apps for driving and bicycling, so wherever we are, we will tell the world where we are in our cars or where we are on our bicycles. There are location apps like Foursquare, in which we tell the world exactly where we are. We check in. We check in at the airport. We check in at a restaurant. We check in when we go home. We check in, perhaps, when we're doing something inappropriate. We check in while we're robbing a bank. We check in while we have an extramarital affair. We check in while we're committing a crime. Everything then is going public on this network. Within the enterprise, within companies, there are apps now and products like Chatter and Yammer, which enable everyone while they're at work to communicate with each other, perpetually, continually. This is a real economy. Yammer just sold to Microsoft for $1 billion. This may not be a $1 trillion economy, but it's a several $100 billion economy. Facebook itself is valued at somewhere between $50 and $100 billion. Twitter is valued at $10 billion. Microsoft is going social. Google is going social. Google, through its social network, Google+, and through a product called Search Plus Your World, is transforming its search engine into a social product. So that in the old days, when we went to Google and we wanted to determine a search, there would be an abstract, objective algorithm that would tell us what we were looking for. Now, Google is reshaping its search algorithm so it becomes a social algorithm. So it will reflect what our friends think, what our friends want to know, what our friends are eating, what our friends are watching. We are living then increasingly in a radically transparent network where everything that's coming online is open. The ideology of this world is of radical transparency and openness. Some people think that's a good thing. Some people say that it will result in people behaving better, sharing more, collaborating. But I believe that the ideologies of collaboration and sharing are actually very dangerous because they do away with the autonomy of the individual. They eliminate loneliness. They eliminate the solitary life. And it's the solitary life that makes us human. It defines us. It gives us meaning. Now, I'm going to show you another clip from a movie. This was made in the 1980s. This movie is called The Truman Story. It's about a guy who gets trapped on a reality TV show. His whole life is filmed, and the world watches him. Hollywood always gets everything before it actually happens, but sometimes we don't take perhaps Hollywood as seriously as we might. But before we get on to this movie, I want to show you one more thing. This is a product called Highlight. Now, at the beginning of this talk, I said, why don't you turn to the person next to you and look at them? Most of you seem slightly shy, you didn't do it, and when you did look at that person, of course, you wouldn't know anything about them. Highlight is a social location app. It says it's a fun way to learn more about people nearby. Highlight, which was the darling of the South by Southwest show this year, is in the business of aggregating all our data so that if you choose to be on Highlight and you're strangers, even if you're sitting next to one another, you will know about them. Highlight is just the beginning. I'm not sure if Highlight will be the next Twitter or Facebook. Some people think it will. But as always in Silicon Valley, everything's in timing. And eventually, products like Highlight that aggregate all our data, all that data that we put out on the network, everything we tell the world what we're doing, will do away with serendipity. The guys at Highlight claim that they're engineering serendipity. But of course, serendipity, that lucky encounter, that chance encounter, which defines what it means to be human, can't be engineered. Once it's engineered, it's no longer serendipitous. So let me show you this clip from the Truman Show.
We've become bored with
This is the kind of Mark Zuckerberg in the movie.
We're tired of pyrotechnics and special effects. While the world he inhabits is, in some respects, counterfeit, there's nothing fake about Truman himself. No scripts, no cue cards. It isn't always Shakespeare, but it's genuine.
It isn't always Shakespeare. It's certainly true of what we put on Facebook, right?
I'm not gonna make it. You're gonna have to go on without me.
course, this new work is starring all of us. It's not just Truman Burbank. We're starring as ourselves.
This mountain, broken legs and all.
We find many viewers leave him on all night for comfort.
You're crazy, you know that?
Well, for me, there is no difference between a private life and a public life. My life is my life.
There's no difference between public and private life. And that is, of course, what's happening on the social web. As we live on the network, privacy is becoming a thing of the past. Now, some people in Silicon Valley say that's a good thing. They think it will just die out, like the horse and cart, like gaslighting, like village life. But I believe that privacy is essential to who we are. So let me give you my very broad critique of what's going wrong. The first thing, of course, is that we don't really represent ourselves very accurately. We treat ourselves as celebrities. There's a great quote when Vertigo was announced as the greatest movie of all time a couple of months ago. The magazine that ran the feature gave a quote. He said, "The reason why it's such a great movie is because it's a movie about people who are not sure who they are, but who are busy reconstructing themselves and each other to fit a kind of ideal of the ideal soulmate." That's what's happening on the internet. We're all imagining ourselves as celebrities. We're all telling the world what we're doing on Facebook and Twitter and all these other networks, but we've lost touch with who we are as human beings. We're losing confidence with who we are. And that accounts for some of the idiocy online, the stupidity, the pictures of us half drunk or half undressed, the rude tweets, the irresponsibility, the lack of civility. We're all imagining we're celebrities. We're all imagining that we're actually actors in Hollywood. It's more than that, though. We've fallen in love with ourselves. And just as Jimmy Stewart in Vertigo fell in love with something that didn't really exist, which was the foundation of the tragedy in Vertigo and the wreckage of his life, so we're all falling in love with ourselves. We are using this platform to broadcast ourselves endlessly, irresponsibly, without any sense, without shame. This photo was taken at the top of the Acropolis. I went up there last year in Athens thinking that I would look at the foundations of Western civilization, but of course what I found at the top was the wreckage of Western civilization. What I found at the top were people endlessly photographing each other and posting those photos on the network. We've lost sense with who we are. We've forgotten the importance of secrecy. We've forgotten what it means to switch the lights on rather than to live in this well-lit room. And by the way, Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook idealizes a well-lit room. When someone said, "What's Facebook all about?" he said he wants to create a digital dorm room for the 21st century, so well-lit that it will never forget, that it will remember everything about us. Now, you guys in Turkey aren't immune to this. I was on the ferry yesterday, and most people were in the business of photographing each other. God knows what happened to this photograph. So this isn't culturally specific. It's not just about Greece or Turkey or the US or Western Europe or China or Japan. This is a global phenomenon. It's changing us as a species. Now, visibility is a trap. It's a trap on many levels. The first trap, of course, is that all these companies are in the business of acquiring our data to exploit us. Facebook, for example, has cleverly marketed itself as a public utility, as a thing that's improving the world. But the truth about Facebook, and the truth about all those other companies that I showed you, is that their business model is taking our data and selling it to advertisers. There's a business model in Silicon Valley that's called free. They give away the products, and we use these products endlessly. But of course, free is never really free. Every time we put more data on Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg gets richer and his smile gets wider. The same is true of Twitter. The same is true of Google. The same is true of all these networks. Free is an illusion. Free is that blonde in Hitchcock movie. It's a great seduction. We're all being tricked to give these companies our data. And it's not just companies. Imagine how much of a trap visibility is. Imagine the way in which healthcare providers are taking advantage of it. When you take out healthcare and they find that you've been smoking or drinking or doing something against your health, imagine how much of a trap that visibility is. And of course, in political terms, visibility is a truly troubling, eerie, nightmarish trap. In the West, in the US, and in Britain, supposedly democratic governments are using social media and all the data we create to spy on us more and more, particularly in an atmosphere of paranoia about terrorism. And of course, in more repressive regimes, less democratic countries, China, Russia, Iran, regimes are actually using social media to trawl for personal data, to root out dissidents, to go after enemies. Visibility, then, is not the thing that brings us together. It's a trap. It exploits us in commercial, political, cultural terms. It's something that we need to be deeply careful about. Now, in my book, the book itself is quite historical. I remind my readers that this has happened before. This photograph is the corpse of Jeremy Bentham, the great late 18th, early 19th century English philosopher, the father of utilitarianism. He invented something called the panopticon, which was a building in which everyone would be perpetually watched. He did it, by the way, he developed this idea while he was consulting for Catherine the Great in Russia. It may not have been coincidental that you come up with this idea of the panopticon while you're consulting for an enlightened despot. But the industrial age also enabled us to be watched. It created the architecture of surveillance. We need to go back then to the middle of the 19th century and remind ourselves of the damage of surveillance in the industrial age. It didn't only result, of course, in fascism and communism, but it also involved the way in which we were reduced into data, into algorithms of pleasure and pain. In my book, I argue that Mark Zuckerberg and Sean Parker and the rest of Silicon Valley are inheriting Jeremy Bentham's utilitarianism. We all need to remind ourselves that history repeats itself in terms of looking for an antidote. The hero of my book and the hero of the 19th century is John Stuart Mill, the English political philosopher who wrote a book in the 19th century, in the middle of the 19th century, called On Liberty. It was a reminder of the primacy of the individual in driving us forward, in building innovation. One of the things that the social crowd, the cult of the social people, argue is that the social creates innovation. But that's not true. Real innovation is driven by people who stand apart from the crowd. This social web is creating conformity, groupthink, orthodoxy. It's, as we live more and more on the network, it's harder and harder to escape the crowd. Last week, at the beginning of last week, I spoke at TEDx in Brussels. And one of the other speakers there was Steve Wozniak, the co-founder of Apple, the guy who essentially invented the personal computer. There's an excellent new book out by a woman called Susan Cain called Quiet, in which she dedicates a whole chapter to Wozniak. Quiet is a defense of the introvert. Cain reminds us that Wozniak invented the personal computer not by sharing, collaborating, conversing, not by sitting in a room with hundreds of other people, not by chatting, not by being on Yammer, not by being on Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter. Wozniak invented the personal computer by working the night shift at his friend Steve Jobs' computer company. He sat in a dark room. He thought it up himself. And that's where real innovation comes from. One of the great fears, apart from the surveillance and voyeurism and the totalitarian, exploitative nature of this increasingly visible network, is it does away with people who really think for themselves. The crowd, the mob mentality is back, and that's why we need to look at John Stuart Mill. Now, this is the end of Vertigo. Well, kind of the end. Watch this, the corpse. There she goes, that blonde. Look at her, finished, dead, corpse. Is that going to happen to us? We finished as a human race? Is the species done now as we live more and more visibly, as we live on the internet? Fortunately, there is an alternative ending. For you to find that ending, you're going to need to read my book, but let me just give you a couple of highlights. The first thing I think we need to do collectively as a species is remind ourselves that we need to use these networks responsibly. We cannot give ourselves away. We need to be careful about what we post and who we post it to. We need to find privacy, default private mechanisms and controls for the network. We need to take back control of our lives. We cannot be seduced by Silicon Valley and this ideology of radical transparency. We cannot believe that showing ourselves to the network is a good thing, or that it's somehow ennobling the human race. We also need government. In my book, I talk about an EU Commissioner of Justice called Viviane Reding, who wants to institutionalize in the EU a law of forgetting. What we need to teach the internet, this place on which we live, is forgetting. The internet is at the moment not human. We go back perhaps to the most primitive village, a place which didn't know how to forget. If we are to make the network habitable, this place which we live more and more, all of us, it needs to learn how to forget. Because forgetting is core to what it means to be human. We have to learn how to forget. The whole business of the 21st century economy is invention and reinvention of the self. But how can we invent and reinvent the self? How can we build and rebuild ourselves in this increasingly competitive world when nothing is forgotten on the network? So we need to learn how to forget. Perhaps technology can help. There's technology being developed in a university in Holland which enables the degeneration of data. Above all else, though, I don't want to rely on government. That's a 20th century solution, and most 20th century solutions never worked in the first place, and they're certainly not going to work in the 21st century. We need the market. We need to embrace new companies, new platforms, new apps, which focus on privacy, which monetize privacy. The free economy isn't really free. Let's find companies and products that charge to distribute our data, to house our data, and therefore guarantee its privacy. Because when something's free, all Mark Zuckerberg has is our data. That's his only way to profitability. That's all he has to sell. Let's also embrace companies like Microsoft that are trying to change their product to realize this new reality. Microsoft's new browser, IE 10, comes with a default privacy rather than publicness. So let's collectively fight this cult of the social, this ideology of radical transparency, through the market, through governments, through ourselves, through teaching. What's needed above all else in our age is not media literacy, but data literacy. As we become data on the network, as we are increasingly defined as information, our reputations, who we are in the 21st century, depends on how we shape, control, manage our data. That's what needs to be taught by parents, in colleges, in schools. So let me end with or almost end with another little clip. This is from the Truman. This is the end. The guy realizes he's been living on a reality TV set, so he escapes. This is a Hollywood ending, so it's all about going up. It's not Hitchcock and falling down. So he's come to the edge of the TV studio. This is the edge of the network in which we're all living on. This is when we get to dump our phones, get off Facebook, stop using Twitter. So he's going to touch reality. What is reality? Good question. So he had nice, cheerful Hollywood music. And here he goes. Where's he going to go? How's he going to escape? How's he going to escape the always-on world, radical visibility, where everyone sees everything he does. There's the exit, there's Mark Zuckerberg. Even he realizes that this has to happen. He's not as bad as he looks. There he goes, look at him. So that's the dark space, and that's the space we need to carve out in the 21st century. That's our challenge collectively as business people, as citizens, as parents, as users of the network. This is the fundamental challenge of the 21st century. How are we going to make that darkness in a place, a world, a platform, a network that is always on? How are we going to maintain and build that dark room when the devices we carry around with us tell the world where we are? How are we going to do it in the future when these devices perhaps get sewn into our clothing or even into our body? How are we going to do it in future when Google comes up with glasses that enables us to look at the world as data and be seen as data? How are we going to be able to do it in a world where we drive Google self-driving cars and where our data is inevitably distributed on the network because the cars will all know where we're going? That's the challenge. It's a fundamental challenge. If we care about, this is a Congress about quality, if we care about the quality of life in the 21st century, then this should be at the front of your minds. The future is arriving. It's unavoidable. And unless we confront it, then the quality of 21st century life will be much lower than any other life known before that we've experienced as a species. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Maybe audiences have some questions. Soru kağıtları bize ulaşmadı ama mikrofon dolaştırabiliriz. Soru sormak isterseniz Andrew Keane hazır olarak bekliyor efendim sorularınızı.
Don't be shy.
Evet, galiba oradan bir soru var. Mikrofonu ulaştırabilir mi acaba arkadaşlarımız?
İngilizce mi Türkçe mi soralım?
Türkçe sorabilirsiniz çünkü
Tamam.
translate edilecek kendisine.
Tamam. Öncelikle ilginç noktaları bizlere aktardığınız için çok teşekkür ediyorum. Benim sormak istediğim, bu güzel noktaları aktarırken bir çözüm var mı bu sizin aktardığınız noktalara? Yani ben kendi firmamın CEO'su olarak normalde sosyal networkleri çok sık kullanmaya vakti olan biri değilim. Ama sürekli görüyorum, herkes sık bir şekilde kullanıyor ve yolda gördüğünüz insanlar bazen telefonlarına bakıp güzel bir tebessümle diğer insanlarla bağlantı kurabiliyor bu noktada. Ama bu bağlantıları daha etkili bir şekilde kullanıp sizin aktardığınız riskleri ortadan kaldırmanın bir çözümü var mı?
Could you follow the question?
I didn't get a translation.
Çeviriyi alamadığını söylüyor Andrew Keane. Biraz daha kısaltılmış haliyle son bölümünü tekrarlar mısınız lütfen kendisine? Bir de sizi göremiyoruz. Ben bile hala nereden sorunun sorulduğunu anlayamadım. Ayağa kalkmanız mümkün mü? Teşekkür ederiz. Evet.
Yeah.
So what's the solution here? Is the short version of the question.
I didn't hear the question, so we can...
Evet, soruyu alamadığını söylüyor. Son kısmını
Tamam.
isterseniz kısaca sorarsanız daha iyi olur.
Kısaca çözüm nedir diyorum. Yani bir çözüm öneriniz var mı bu probleme?
Ama neye çözüm? İsterseniz hani insanlar görüyorum, gülümsüyorlar yolda, işte mesaj gelmiş. O kısmını tekrarlar mısınız?
Tamam. Genelde görüyoruz ki insanlar bir şekilde bağlantı kurabiliyorlar sosyal network üzerinden. Ve bir şekilde onların hayatlarına şu anda bir avantaj gibi görünüyor. Ama sizin aktardığınız birçok önerdiğiniz problemler var bu konuyla ilgili. Bunlara yönelik bir çözüm var mı insanlığı 22. yüzyılda kurtarmak için?
So the question was, you will understand it. The question is about, again, solutions. I think the first thing to bear in mind is we need to understand that these networks are, for better or worse, the platforms of life. In America, for example, more and more colleges are determining whether or not to accept students by looking at their network, at Facebook and these other networks. Employers are using these networks more and more as well. Indeed, there are new networks which are reputation networks that quantify our value. There's one called Clout in San Francisco, where you get a score according to how powerful you are on the network. And one of the Asian airlines, Cathay Pacific, has actually a new policy at their airport where if you have a certain score above 60 on Clout, you get to go into their first-class lounge. So we're increasingly moving into a reputation economy, what sociologists and thinkers about the internet call a reputation economy, in which it will be easier and easier to determine people's value. As I said, I think the first thing to acknowledge is that this is a reality, unavoidable. We can't go back to the dark ages. You can't trash your device. Only the very rich or the very poor can afford not to be on the network. But we need to learn how to cultivate our reputations. Children need to be taught from a very early age that the inappropriate photo, the rude tweet, never gets eliminated. It can ruin their lives. It can mean that colleges won't accept them. It can mean that universities or employers won't take them on. So, firstly, I think we need to take individual responsibility. That's what data literacy is all about. But as I said also, we need to maintain that more and more of these networks are by default private, so that we can be confident that when we say something, the world won't be listening, that the world won't always have access to what we say. But I think the most important thing to note is that for better or worse, we are more and more visible. And the 21st century offers a peculiar opportunity for us to, what I would call, curate the self. Once upon a time, in the analog age, we didn't leave the world very much. Now we will leave our digital footprint. It will affect all our relationships. I think one of the ones it will most affect is family life. How many of you knew anything about your parents' history? Most of you look as if you're in my generation. How much do you know about your parents? What they did when they were young, what they said, what they looked like, what their network was. We're leaving now increasingly dense, intimate records. We'll know our parents before perhaps they know themselves. It also shapes parents' relationship with children. I used to be on Facebook. I was on Facebook to do research for my book. But I became a Facebook dissenter. I left it, partly because I was sick of it and it's a complete waste of time. And it's easy for me to be off it because my reputation is built on being against Facebook. But also because it horrified me the way in which parents, responsible good parents, would unthinkingly plaster the network with photographs of their children without even asking them, photographs of their infants. So it's going to dramatically influence, I think, the nature of relationships, both external to the family and internal. And we need to understand, I mean, the question is, how do we solve it? There's no way of solving it. It's the central reality in many ways of how we live our lives in the digital age. We have to master it. The curation of the self offers a very interesting opportunity. We can leave wonderfully rich legacies. We can leave legacies that reflect our complexity, our depth, our thoughtfulness. It doesn't have to be inane. It doesn't have to be narcissistic. We don't necessarily need to leave photographs of ourselves drunk, half undressed. We don't necessarily need to leave tweets which are rude or inappropriate or just stupid. So ultimately, it's up to us. In this democratic age, the curation of the self could be remarkable. We could leave rich legacies to our ancestors. It could be like the Renaissance, or it could be like the Dark Ages. It's up to us.
Evet, başka soru var mı acaba? Evet, orada bir parmak kaldırılıyor. Buraya bir mikrofon ulaştırabilir miyiz?
Kısa bir sorum olacak kendisine. Sizin herhangi bir sosyal ağda hesabınız var mı? Facebook, Twitter gibi, onu merak ettim ben.
Sorry. Yeah. Yeah, do I have any social network accounts? That sometimes comes up. My first book, Cult of the Amateur, was against blogs. But of course I had my own blog to promote the book. And the first question journalists would always ask is, oh, you're against blogs and you have your own blog. Isn't that an element of hypocrisy? Which of course in some senses it is. But it also confronts the reality of our digital age. Is if you want to be pure, invisibility is all very well, it protects the self, but it doesn't help you earn a living. I'm not on any of the networks except Twitter. Twitter for me as a writer is essential. If you want to follow me, I'm at AJ Keen. I have over 20,000 followers, and it's an important way to distribute my writing skills, to encourage people to buy my book and hire me as a public speaker. So the question is a fair one, and the question does speak to the way in which these platforms are essential to us in terms of how we earn our living. It's not just then about narcissism. For us to operate in this economy, in this knowledge economy, we need these networks. They're unavoidable. That's why this book is, and this issue is so complex. It's not just, if it was just about giving this thing up because it was a bad blonde, that would be okay. But as the industrial economy changes into a knowledge economy, as fewer and fewer, particularly in America, work for large companies and work for themselves, as we enter what one economist called the free agent economy. So these platforms, maybe not so much Facebook, but particularly networks like Twitter and LinkedIn, are the platforms we use to sell ourselves. So they're essential. So I hope this speech, while it scares you in a way, doesn't say to you, throw away your devices. It shouldn't say to you, don't be on the networks. You have to be on these networks. You want to promote yourself, curate yourself, create your skills, show the world what you can do. But at the same time, we need to use these things responsibly. So I may be an example of someone who's been careful about how I use these networks. I use Twitter because I have to, but I'm certainly not on any of the location networks. I would never tell the world where I am. I'm not on Foursquare, I'm not on Highlight. And to me, it's a mystery why anyone would want to broadcast to the world where they are all the time. To me, that really is a deep mistake. I want to be alone. I don't want to be always being recognized. That, maybe we call it loneliness or solitariness, is to me what it means to be human. And I want to be forever being bothered by people. There was another question.
Evet, buyurun.
There has been an increasing number of cases.
Is that a question? Do you have problems with your headphones? Yeah, no, I do hear you now.
Okay.
Can we blame the internet on headphones? No. Go
on. There has been an increasing number of cases of cyberbullying and crimes related to that. And it might certainly jump into the workplace as well, just as much as affect teenagers. So do you think there should be legislatures or some kind of checks and balance on the social media, or is that even possible? Should we have it?
So that's a good question. in terms of bullying? Do we need to legislate? Well, I think our current laws work. I mean, I'm not familiar with the law in Turkey, but in the US and the UK, there are laws about bullying. There are laws about persecution. There are laws where people can be in trouble for spreading malicious lies about somebody else. So it's not so much the laws themselves, but whether they can be implemented on the internet. Let me give you an example. There was the Manchester United. You're all, of course, familiar with Manchester United since your team beat them yesterday. The Manchester United star forward, Ryan Giggs, was having an extramarital affair. And the identity of the woman, I think she was a celebrity, was barred by the court from being revealed. But some people on Twitter got hold of the name. And then a couple of days later, 70,000 people had rebroadcast the name of this woman and the identity of the relationship, which isn't illegal, of course. An extramarital relationship may not be the most moral of things, but it's not illegal. You can't be, it's not against the law. And suddenly everyone on the network knew it. Now, what do you do against 70,000 people on Twitter? It's a similar sort of problem to how do you legislate against people stealing records online? When everyone's stealing, it's hard to put everyone in jail. And you have a similar problem today. Look what's happening in America with General Petraeus and we have, what the problem, I think, is a cultural one, is we have a culture which is more and more invasive, nosier and nosier, more and more moralistic, and we have the technology that allows people to reveal what they're doing. So be very careful. Never, if you're having an extramarital affair, don't use email. At least meet the people in the street. That was a joke. And the important thing, I think, when it comes to bullying, of course, is that it does enable awful kind of bullying on the network. There have been a number of cases, or a few cases in the US, of people committing suicide. In my book, I talk about a young man who was gay. He was a college student, and he was outed. His college roommate took a video of him in which he was compromised sexually, and then posted it on the network. The worst kind of bullying, of course. And this young man, who was very talented, a scholar, very brilliant student, committed suicide. So you have more and more of this going on. The guy who posted the thing was sent to jail. So we have to make examples of bullies. But the reality, I think, is you've got, 11 and 12 and 13-year-olds now on Facebook, and kids, by definition, are bullying. They're not the kindest of people always towards one another. So what you have on the internet is exaggerated, the exaggerated sort of features of school life. So I don't believe we need extra legislation. I think we need more careful, if you like, surveillance, and more careful education of how children should behave towards one another, both in the home. But I think that bullies need to also be used as an example. So I'm not against sending bullies to jail or punishing them some way or other. The problem with this culture, though, is it's so public. The bullies, their lives are ruined as well. Remember in the old days, in the schoolyard, you're always going to have bullies. That reflects the nature of things. But a bully could bully a child, wouldn't have their lives wrecked. They may be reformable. The problem with the internet is everything's exaggerated. So someone who's a bully can bully someone not in front of 2 or 3 other kids in the playground, but in front of 20 or 30,000 other kids on Facebook or some other social network. So that's the scary thing, is understanding the often unintended consequences of what you're doing, of teasing, of not respecting other individuals. But I do think we have to be careful about overreacting and building too much legislation. On the other hand, I'm also against the libertarianism in Silicon Valley that says that any kind of legislation will break the internet. The internet is our new social contract. It's our new platform for life. It needs the same laws that we have in society. What the internet needs to learn is many, many people on the internet see it purely in terms of rights. We need to think of our behavior online not only as rights, but also in terms of responsibilities. And those responsibilities we need to instill not only in ourselves, but above all else, of course, in our children.
Okay. Evet, başka sorusu olan var mı acaba salondan? Ben göremiyorum. I think no more questions. Bir kişi daha var. Evet, oraya hemen bir mikrofon ulaştırabilir miyiz? Sanırım son soru olacak saatimiz itibariyle.
Okay, last question.
You have talked about the increased use of social networks and the increase in the amount of data and information, and I agree with that. But at the same time, I believe the social networks have a self-destructing effect on themselves. As an example, like 6-7 years ago, I would use Facebook on a daily basis. I would check every day. Now I rarely use it once a month. Similarly, my personal email, I used to check every day. Now I try, and I try very hard to check it once a week, because I receive a lot of email, and at my work email, it's kind of getting too much. I think once people realize these are not essential needs for their lives, I think the use will go less and less, and that's why I believe these types of networks have a self-destructing effect. Would you agree with that?
Yes and no. I mean, I think you're right, is that these networks become very fashionable and then lose their fashionability very quickly. So the best example is MySpace, which 5 years ago was the dominant, or 6 years ago was the dominant social network, and now it has no value. Facebook may indeed become very uncool. The cycles of change in Silicon Valley and on the web are much more heightened than in the physical world. But so you're right in that sense. But there'll always be new networks. After Facebook, there comes Twitter. After Twitter, there's Pinterest or Tumblr. There's always a new one. There's always something more innovative, cooler, more enticing. So you're right on that. But I don't think we can, I mean, I respect what you've done. And certainly I was like you. I got off Facebook. It became very boring and annoying. But life is becoming digitalized. You must be very lucky only to be able to check your email every week. I need to check my email all the time. I have to deal with my publisher, my speaking agent. I have to deal with readers. I have my family. I'm traveling all the time. So I don't think most of us can afford not to look at our email every day. Most of us can't get away with only looking at our email every week. Digital life is the central reality. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to check your email every 30 seconds. That's also addictive and destructive. That reflects the addictive, destructive nature of digital life. But at the same time, we have to realize that these things are necessary and that we shouldn't be embarrassed if we check our email every hour. Because if we're in the business of selling ourselves, if we have a job which we need to be on email, that's the nature of things. It doesn't necessarily reflect us badly. I think we have to be careful not to make all this technology purely evil, because it isn't. It's essential. It can be evil, it can be destructive, it can undermine who we are, but we have to live with it. It's a reality. It's the central reality of who we are. We are digital men in the 21st century. Digital women too. Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us and sharing your opinions with us. Evet, bu noktada Sayın Hamdi Doğan'ı tekrar davet etmek istiyorum çünkü kendisi bir hediye sunmak istiyor. May I ask you to stay for a couple of minutes? Evet, bir hediye sunacağız. Hemen verelim. Teşekkür ederiz. Evet, ayrılmadan önce çok küçük bir notum olacak tekrar. Biliyorsunuz oturumlarımız devam ediyor. Bugün öğle yemeğimiz saat 13-14 arasında yine kongre merkezinin içindeki yemek alanında gerçekleştirilecek. Saat 14'te yaşam biçimi olarak kalite oturumunda yine bu salonda buluşacağız efendim. Güzel bir gün diliyorum hepinize.